All right, good morning and welcome. Let's begin. Where did we leave off last week? We're learning about the story of Purim. We're learning about the fact that in the middle of the Megillah, we have this moment where it says, "Balayla hahu nadadosh nasa melech." That night, the king's sleep was disturbed, and apparently that's where the miracle really begins. The custom of the Maharil, which is our custom as Ashkenazi Jews, is that when you reach that point in the Megillah, the reader has to raise his voice, "Balayla hahu," because that's when the miracle began to happen. And initially we thought that's a strange place to say the miracle started to happen. I mean, surely the miracle began before that, because we have Esther and Mordechai placed in really powerful positions. Esther's the queen, Mordechai had saved the king's life, and he's a senior minister in the government. Surely there were other miracles that happened before this. And so what we have begun to unpack over here is the miracle is in the night, the king, referring over here to Malko Yishel Olam, the king of all kings, the king of the entire universe, that's who was disturbed. And effectively what we've explained is that night and day are metaphoric for the period of golus and the period of geula. In other words, a time of divine revelation, like in the time of the Beis HaMikdash, or in the future time of Mashiach. That is compared to daytime. Just as the day is bright and you can see everything that you need to see, likewise, there are periods in history where it's spiritually bright and you can see everything that you need to see. And likewise, the corollary is that sometimes it's dark and you don't see, and it's a little bit dangerous. We know that nighttime is a more treacherous time. You're a little bit more vulnerable. You can't really see where you're going and so forth. So that indicates the concept of golus. Golus is a time where it's dark, it's spiritually dark. We're not exactly sure how we should behave, what we should do, which leaders we should follow, and so on and so forth. So to be in the middle of the night, meaning to say in the middle of the golus, which is when the Purim story happened. The Purim story occurred during a period of golus. As the Gemara tells us, even after the Purim miracles happened, we were still under Achashverosh's rule. We were still not restored to Israel, and we were still not allowed to rebuild the Beis HaMikdash. So we were still in a state of golus, and in spite of that, the king's sleep is disturbed. Now, sleep is going to emerge as this incredible metaphor to help us understand the principle of golus. So when we examine sleep and we appreciate what goes on during sleep, that will help us to understand on a deeper level what really goes on during the course of golus. And it's not necessarily as straightforward as you would have expected, because at face value, when we began our conversation, we said, okay, we get it. We understand what happens. When a person is awake, all the functions of the person are controlled properly by the person. So you can speak sense, and you can relate to the world around you, and you can choose where you're going to look, and of course your eyes are open. So that kind of indicates proper control, something about the person really being in a good and healthy place. Whereas when a person is sleeping, so you don't see, and you don't necessarily think in the most logical fashion. You just have to pay attention to your dreams, and you'll know that they don't necessarily follow a logical pattern. And so, you've got the sense that you're, when you sleep, things are kind of out of control. However, what we have identified, and this is where it starts to get interesting, we've identified that the truth be told, even when a person is asleep, everything works. Everything works. Maybe it doesn't work in the same way as when you're awake, but everything works. The body keeps living, person breathes, their heart beats, the brain functions, everything works. What we call the koichos hanefesh, the different components or faculties of the soul, are in working order. So what doesn't work when a person is asleep? What doesn't work is the outer show. So you can't share those things with the people around you. Effectively, that's what happens. When a person is sleeping, you just kind of cut off from your environment, but internally, as an individual, as a being, as an entity, there you are, you're working, everything's good. So that was an intriguing bit of information about the concept of sleep. If sleep is supposed to represent the concept of golus, so golus then does not mean, God forbid, that things are not working. It's just that things are not visible. Now that's our first important insight into appreciating what's going on over here. Last week we began to take it to a deeper level. So we just started the piece last week. I'm going to go back and start again from that paragraph, because now we're going to see that actually this concept of sleep, and as it relates to golus, is a lot more profound than people think. It's so easy to take ideas and just speak about them in the most simplistic fashion. Say, there's a spiritual awake state and there's a spiritual sleeping state, meaning Okay, here's the simple way you could explain it. Meaning, there's a time where you're more, so to speak, connected, and a time where you're, so to speak, less connected, and that'd be able to be simple. But we're going to discover that it's far from simple. And we're going to discover that the nature of sleep, certainly the sleep from a neshama point of view, is so different to what we expect, and based on that, the experience of golus is so different to what we expect. And that momentary flash of the king waking up in the middle of the night, as described in the Purim story, is a lot more than just about the Purim story, and it's a lot more than just that individual miracle. It's actually a tremendous insight into where we're going. What's the point? Why do you sleep? Why do we have a golus? So there's quite a lot of interesting information that's going to unfold during the course of what's coming next in the Maimer. Let's take a look at, we're at paragraph 3, paragraph Gimel, and let's pick up where we started last week. Remember that the Rebbe bases this particular discourse on a discourse from his predecessor, his father-in-law, the Friedrich Rebbe, so he keeps referring back to what the Friedrich Rebbe said in his own Maimer on the topic. Like here, the previous Rebbe continues to describe and explain in his discourse who bedugmas hakoichos k'mo shem klulim be'etzem hanefesh shesham kol hakoichos heim bashva. What happens when a person's sleeping? One of the things we identified is when you sleep, you're horizontal, and Hashem designed it that way. That's the most common way for us to sleep, and the most comfortable way for us to sleep is to lie down. So Hashem designed that. That's not accidental. It wasn't an invention of the mattress companies. That's really the best way for us to sleep. Why? Because when a person is awake, you can very clearly distinguish the hierarchy of different parts of the person, different faculties of the soul. And you can see, for example, that the brain, the mind, the intellect is the most advanced and therefore the highest part of the human body, as compared, let's say, to other vital organs that keep a human being alive, but they're not nearly as sophisticated. Again, let's do a comparison between the brain and the heart. We did discuss this. So the heart's job is effectively to be a muscle that does two things. It basically pumps, and then it relaxes, and then it pumps and it relaxes. That's its job. Doesn't have to do more. And yes, of course, from a poetic perspective, we always use the heart as the seat of emotion, and that's because we do feel emotion in the muscle of the heart. But at the end of the day, you can't compare the complexity of the heart to that of the brain. The brain, which we're still trying to get to understand with all the science that we have, ultimately it's so advanced and it controls so many different things, and it's so diverse. And very often people believe that certain parts of the brain are solely responsible for certain functions, and then you get people who have damage to one part of the brain, and yet they still have those functions. And there's this crossover and this like inter-networked element of the brain. There's a lot of the brain we just simply don't understand. So when a person is awake, you see it. The brain is at the top. And then as you go down the body, so the functions become a little bit more simple. When a person's sleeping, it's all on the same plane. So you don't, while the person is sleeping, you don't notice the greatness of the brain over the rest of the body. If you had to look at Einstein sleeping next to a grade 1 child, outwardly, you wouldn't, of course, you recognize Einstein by face. That's the only reason you think that he's a big deal. But you wouldn't identify anything about Einstein's genius in the way that he sleeps. He sleeps like everybody sleeps. Okay, maybe he has a more restless sleep, maybe he's an insomniac, I don't know. But the bottom line is, when he is asleep, it looks outwardly the same. So that's the big thing that we distinguished about sleep versus wake, is that when you're asleep, you're in a state that we can't tell the greatness of one part of the person, one part of the soul over the other, whereas when a person is awake, we can. So now the Rebbe is going to tell us that state, the sleep state, where you can't tell the distinction or the greatness of one component over the other, even though that sounds, and it is, a less sophisticated or less impressive state of the person, because it is, right? When Einstein is lecturing, that's a very impressive state of the person. Wow, Einstein, nobody can teach what he could teach. When Einstein is sleeping, there's nothing impressive. Whoa, did you see the way that Einstein sleeps? Although I must add that the Gemara says the greatness of a Torah scholar is that even when they sleep, you can see that the way they sleep is different. But that's subject for a different conversation. Outwardly, as far as we're concerned, the average person, typically the way that it works is that if a person is asleep, we don't see their greatness. So the Rebbe says that's comparable, even though that sounds like it's a negative, it sounds like it's a weakness of sleep. It is reminiscent of a very advanced, elevated state of a person where you also can't tell the difference. Where is that? The neshama at its source. Okay, now let's just understand this for a second. Very often we make the mistake of thinking that a person is the sum of all the parts of the person. So in other words, let's say I know somebody, right? And I know them really well. I've known them my whole life. I've known them their whole life. And I really, really know them well. So I know how they think, and I know how they feel, and I know who they like, and I know so much about them. So would it be fair for me to then say, I know that person better than they know themselves? Now people say that. They say that often, right? I know so-and-so better than they know themselves. The truth is that is maybe a little bit of a superlative, right? You can't know somebody better than they know themselves, because the only way you can know somebody is from the outside. So you can only know whatever it is about themselves that they share, either consciously or subconsciously with you, but you can never know how it looks from the inside. You can only know what it looks like from the outside. So therefore it would be a mistake to try and construct a person by the sum of their parts. Okay, so I know that this person is really good at maths. They have a very logical mind, so that's one piece of themselves. And I know that they're also empathetic, which is unusual for a person who's so scientific. So that's another part of themselves. And I also know that they have a particular taste in music. And I know that and I put that all together. If I had to take all of those pieces and there was a way to translate those pieces into some kind of electrical impulse or some kind of a chemical compound, I still wouldn't be able to put a person together out of that, because ultimately the essence of a person is not the sum of their parts. If anything, all the different parts of the person are, because the essence is so powerful, the essence is so strong, it has the ability to create all of those parts. Now, if that sounds a little bit abstract, try this. If I had to take light, is light the 7 colors of the rainbow spinning at high speed? You know, like if you do a color wheel. Ever done a color wheel? So you put the 7 colors, you put a string through the middle and you pull it, and it's the circle starts to spin, and then it all looks white. So is light, which we know if you shine light through a prism, it's going to refract, and then I'm going to get the colors of the rainbow. And that's what happens when I see a rainbow in the sky. It's light being refracted through the droplets of water. So does that mean that light is red plus blue plus indigo plus violet? You know, that's what makes light, those 7 different components? Or is it more correct to say that light is a pure energy that when it is passed through a particular medium has the ability to produce the spectrum of colors? That would be more accurate. Even though practically I can reverse engineer it, right? I can spin the wheel and create white again, but that doesn't mean that those colors make white. Actually, it's the fact that light makes those colors. So if a particular color is not being absorbed by the surface, that's the color that I see. Okay, so without getting overly technical, but I think you get the picture. So the point we're saying over here is this. There is another state in which I look at a person and I can't tell the greatness of any one part of the faculties of their soul, because now I'm looking at the essence of their soul. And when I look at the essence of the soul, it's so powerful and it's so intense that it has not yet become compartmentalized. Okay, which is a fascinating thought. So when I speak to somebody and they strike me as intelligent, that means that their soul is currently filtering through a channel called intelligence. And that's like, wow, I'm impressed this person has intelligence. I can now make the mistake of thinking that this person's essence is intelligence. It's not true. It's a particular channel that their soul happens to be filtering through. Now, before that person opened their mouth, I had no idea about their intelligence, but I still know that they exist. I look at the person, I see them. This is this individual. It's you. It's not somebody else. I don't know what you is yet. I don't know what you are all about. I don't know what goes on inside. I don't know how you think. I don't know how smart you are. I don't know what you feel. I don't know anything, but I see you, the whole you, in one shot. Now that's a little bit of a poor example, but effectively, if we had the technology that we could look inside somebody's neshama and see the essence of their neshama, we would not see intellect swimming around and empathy swimming around and discipline and like all different measurements or degrees to which each is functional. We wouldn't see that. We would just see this pulsating energy called soul that when it's put through the relevant filters will then produce intelligence and feelings and communication and so on and so forth. So this is fascinating. When I look at a person asleep, I'm unable to see, are they smart, are they not? Let's say it's somebody I don't know from before. Are they clever? Are they disciplined? Are they a good communicator? Are they friendly? I can't see any of that just looking at the person while they're asleep, which is fascinating because that's reminiscent of how it would look if I could stare right into the depth of their soul, and there also I would not be able to see the distinct patterns of their personality because I'd be looking at a part of them that is deeper and greater than their personality. So you've got almost like two ends of a spectrum over here. When the person is asleep and shut down, I have limited or almost no access into understanding who they are, which ironically is exactly as it was if I were to be able to see them at their deepest point, because there also I wouldn't be able to see the details of who they are. So that tells us that there's some kind of a hyperlink, there's some kind of connection between the sleeping state and the deep soul state. Okay, it's a connection. It's not to say when you are asleep, that means that you're in touch with the deepest part of your soul. That's not what it means. It just means Hashem has given us, in our normal human experience, a way of seeing somebody with the same kind of mystery around them as if we were to see the essence of their soul. It's a fascinating thought, and we're going to develop the thought a lot further. V'hainu, what that means is, the inyan is salmos ha-koiches shebe'is Hasheinu hu masha ha-koiches mis'alim o mistalkim the shorsham etzem ha-nefesh. Why is it that when I look at a person who is asleep, I'm not able to see the specifics of who they are and how they operate and what their great assets are? Because all of that has receded and disappeared and is, so to speak, reabsorbed back into the essence. Okay? Again, it's a little tricky to understand exactly how this works, but let's use an example we can relate to. Much easier example, and it will just give us a bit of a glimpse into what's going on over here. Let's say that somebody's talking, and they're not just talking casual conversation. Let's say that somebody is talking about a very profound concept, a philosophical concept, a legal concept, a mystical concept, whatever it is, they're busy talking. As long as the person is talking, you are absolutely enthralled. This is fascinating. Do you hear what this person's saying? I've never heard anything like this before. It's absolutely fascinating. And there you are. You're completely in the zone, and you're listening with both ears, and you're ignoring your environment, and you just want to take it all in. And then, while the person is talking, they pause briefly. They pause. Now that's fine, because you recognize the fact that maybe they need to catch their breath, maybe they're just thinking about something that they wanted to share with you, and that's okay. So you wait patiently, and they pause for whatever it is, a couple of minutes, and then they carry on talking. Okay, good. And then you realize, actually, I'm glad that they paused because that helped them just to consolidate what they wanted to say next, and that's actually good for me. Sometimes, though, the person is not just going to pause for a minute or two. Sometimes the person pauses. And they don't just pause, they kind of look like they zoned out. That's what it looks like. It looks like they've zoned out. And it's not just for a minute, it goes for 5 minutes. I don't think anybody realizes how long 5 minutes is in awkward silence. So for 5 minutes, this person is just sitting there completely zoned out. Their eyes are glazed over. It doesn't even look as if they are aware of the fact that you're there. Now you have two choices, right? You could sit patiently, or you could try snap them out of it. Truth is, you have a third option as well. You can walk out of the room. Now at that point in time, where that person's kind of completely zoned out, what is clear is that they've gone deeper into themselves for whatever reason. So let's say, same principles we said before, they're thinking deeply about the concept, but it's not just that they're deciding what next to say. In the course of talking, this happens to us all, in the course of talking, as we say something, it helps us understand what we've previously known in a whole different light. So here's somebody who's busy teaching, and says, whoa, hang on a second, that's just giving me an insight. I need to think about that insight because I know what's going to happen. If I don't think about it right now, by the end of this class, I'll forget about the fact that I even had the insight. So I've got to grab it while it's there, and then that takes them into this whole very interesting experience of deep meditation, trying to understand the idea. And the more they recede from you, the deeper they go into their own meditation. So from you, the student's perspective, they're drifting. From theirs, the teacher's perspective, they're actually connecting much more than they were before. Not connecting with you, but connecting with the idea, connecting with themselves, connecting with their insight. So that would be a little bit of an example of exactly what we're talking about over here. When something recedes from view, it could mean that it's dying, but it could also mean that it is going back to where it came from, that it's reconnecting to its source. And as it reconnects to its source, the source is so overpowering and the source is so powerful that you can no longer see on the outside. That's what's happening when a person sleeps. The reason that the faculties of the soul are not speaking to the world is because during sleep, the faculties of the soul are reconnecting to the essence of the soul. Isn't that fascinating? That's what happens when we sleep. So maybe that's a spiritual explanation of why we feel refreshed once we wake up from having slept, because the outward, active part of the soul has had an opportunity to recharge from the epicenter of the soul. So that's what happens when we sleep, right? What's happening when we sleep is we've got this part of our neshama that is reconnecting to the essence of our neshama. And that's why I can't talk on the outside, I can't express on the outside. Now remember, the only reason we're speaking about sleep is because we want to use that as a metaphor to help us understand how things are with Hashem's revelation in our world during the course of golus. So mizeh muvan gam b'hanimshal. We'll now take this parable of sleep, this metaphor of sleep, and we're going to retranslate it back into Hashem's interaction with us. This is a pivotal shift in how we're supposed to see golus. I look outside we're in golus right now, right? I look outside during golus and I think, it is really dark out there. What does dark mean to me? It means like Hashem's let the world just start to fall apart. We don't know how we're going to control this virus. We don't know if the vaccine is going to be 100% effective. We don't know when we're going to be able to travel again. We don't know what's going to happen to business. We don't know how this is going to affect the young children's formative years. We don't know what the knock-on effect on society is going to be. We don't know what's going to happen to world economies. We don't know. The world is in darkness. Now, if we think that this is the first time the world has been in darkness, just read history and we'll appreciate that the world for the last 2,000 years has consistently been in darkness with the odd occasional patch of a bit of light. The darkness of pogroms and inquisitions and anti-Semitism and war and competition and jealousy and illness and all the terrible things that happen in the world. To us, we say, if the world is in such a mess, the only explanation is Hashem has stepped away. Because if Hashem was here in a revealed fashion, none of this would happen. Isn't that what Mashiach is all about? Isn't Mashiach all about v'nigle kvoid Hashem, that Hashem will be absolutely revealed, and as a direct consequence of the fact that Hashem is revealed, there'll be no death, and there'll be no illness, and there'll be no war, and there'll be no jealousy. So if there are all of those things, that implies that Hashem has checked out. He's not involved in the world. And that technically appears to be true because we say that golus is a time of sleep. Except that now we're starting to appreciate that, yes, sleep is negative to the recipient, but what's happening to the person? The person is rejuvenating. The person is getting powered so that they can go back into the world tomorrow with new strength and fresh ideas and new perspectives. So what's happening in the spiritual realms? If I'm living, or we're living in a state of golus, that means Hashem has retracted the revealed, nice to have energy and linked it back into the essence, true energy, to Hashem's essence. Now we have to know, and then what? But we're not ready for the then what yet. There's still quite a bit of the mimer before we get to the then what. But it's quite something for us to understand that what outwardly appears to be ignoring, my teacher has totally drifted off. You're ignoring me, teacher. You're supposed to be talking to me, and instead you're sitting here with your glazed look on your face. What looks to me like I'm being ignored in the teacher's world is the teacher becoming more empowered, the teacher touching all the way to the essence of his being. Like the statement that the Zohar makes on the words of Yirmiyahu, that Rachel cries over her children, Ki einenu, because God is absent. What do you mean God is absent? Says the Zohar, the Kutchabrichu solik le'ele she'ala limekoy mecheder lifnim mecheder. So the Zohar says, what do you mean Ki einenu? It means Hashem is absent from our consciousness. So where is Hashem? Solik le'ele. Hashem has moved to a higher dimension, something that's beyond our consciousness and beyond our range of vision. And of course, we as humans always make the mistake of thinking if there's something I can't see, then it doesn't exist. So if Hashem is beyond our range of consciousness and vision, we say Hashem's not here. Hashem has abandoned us. But what has Hashem done? Olalim koimo, says the Zohar, he has gone to, so to speak, his place. Cheder lifnim mecheder, one room within another room, which implies he's kind of locked himself inside himself. Very similar to that teacher who's locked himself inside himself, trying to explore a new idea, because it's impossible to explore that idea if you're busy badgering him with questions or whatever. So he's gone all the way inside himself. That's what sleep is. That's what golus is. It's a temporary suspension of Hashem's engagement with us so that he can touch, so to speak, a deeper part of himself. Now, we'll have to understand exactly what that means. Hashem touching himself doesn't really make sense. It's all going to pan out during the course of this and the next and the following paragraphs. The first thing that we have to know is the first thing we have to know is that Hashem's disappearance during the course of golus is only reality as we see it. So to us, Hashem is not here right now. That is our perception. And why is that our perception? Because it's true that we don't have divine revelation right now. We don't. Let's be honest. You drive down the street. What do you see on the side of the road? What do you see? Dirt. Overgrown sidewalks. Beggars. People who are aggressive in the traffic. People who appear to be selfish. You see derelict buildings. You see pollution. That's what you see when you look around. You don't see godliness. Nobody drives down the street and suddenly feels whoosh, like this whoosh of godly energy. Nobody stops at a red light and you look to the person who's knocking on your window and saying, please, I need 2 rand. Nobody looks at them and says, oh, a being created in the divine image. Nobody looks at the billboards on the side of the highway and sees that the billboards are declaring Ein oid milvadoi, there's nothing else besides God, or Toiv Hashem lakol, that Hashem is good to every single being. We don't see that. What do we see? We see buy insurance because your things might be stolen or broken. That's what we see on the billboards. What we see on the billboards. We see, here's a way to numb your brain and entertain yourself with the following magical programs that you could sit in front of and vegetate with every single night at home. That's what we see. We don't see godliness in the world. So it's true that our experience is Hashem has switched off the lights. So that is all looking through the perspective of us, the recipients. But if you look at the or, the energy that Hashem previously had shone into our lives, that energy is in a better place, so to speak. So during the time, let's say, of the Beis Hamikdash, which was a time of tremendous divine revelation, the revelation was very much in our world. So that was good for us. We walked to Jerusalem, we went up to the Temple Mount, entered the Beis Hamikdash, and boom, suddenly someone had turned on the spiritual lights and we could see godliness and it was real to us and it was tangible and it was like, wow, absolutely overwhelming. And then the Beis Hamikdash went. So what happened? Off went the lights. But it's not that they turned off and disappeared. The light was recalled back to the source of light. So in electrical light, you don't see this, right? In electrical light, you turn off the light, that's what happens. The light goes off. But in sunlight, you do see this. Because in sunlight, theoretically, okay, the sun is obviously radiating light outwards all the time. Then you get, everybody was so uncomfortable in Joburg over the last few days because, here we were with cloud cover for day after day. What kind of thing is this? It's supposed to be summer. What is this? It's so gloomy. The jokes that were doing the rounds that if it continues this way, we're all going to develop English accents. Well, did the sun disappear? No, the sun is fine. Sun is absolutely fine. In fact, the sun's rays that are hitting down to earth are just rebounding off the clouds and going back into the atmosphere. So the light's not disappearing. The light's going back in the direction from where it came. When Hashem dims the lights during the course of golus, the holiness, the spirituality that should be so clear to us, what happens? It's not that the light disappears. It just goes back in the direction from where it came. It reconnects back to its source. And that's what Hashem wants us to identify in human sleep. When you look at a person who is sleeping, what you will notice is their neshama has largely disengaged from their body. That's why the body is lying there just like prone and barely moving. Because the neshama is largely disconnected from the body. That's why the eyes are closed, because the person's incapable of seeing, because the neshama is detached from the body. And that's why the kind of thoughts that run through a person's dreams can be completely illogical, because the neshama is detached from the body. So the faculties are not running as they should. So if I think that a human being is just a body, then I think, gee, the human being is part way to death. As the Gemara calls it, 1/60th of death. However, but when I recognize that actually a human being is mostly a neshama, a soul, dafka during the time of sleep, that's actually the best experience for the soul, because now the soul is released from the body. It's released from the needs of a body to eat and to entertain itself and to socialize and all those things. And now the neshama is free. And the neshama has an opportunity to reconnect to its source and to recharge its batteries. Because in the same way as we physically need to sleep in order to be able to get through tomorrow, the neshama also needs to recharge in order to inspire us that tomorrow should include things that are meaningful and are holy and are connected to Hashem. So the neshama is actually in the happiest space during sleep, because it's not bogged down with the body and all of its distractions. And now it can connect to Hashem. It all depends what we're looking at. If our focus and all we are capable of seeing is only physical stuff, then the sleeping person is a lost cause. The moment we're able to mature our perspective and say, actually, that's just the outer casing, the real person lives on the inside, and that's the neshama, we say, oh, well, that neshama seems to be doing pretty well right now. Same thing with golus. If my only perception of the world is how godliness impacts me, then it's fair for me to say I feel detached, but I should never make the leap of saying, therefore, God is less revealed. And he's absolutely revealed, just not in my dimension. Okay. So we need to understand this principle a little bit better, because it's a nice idea. It's a little bit abstract still at this point in time. It leaves some questions, let's be honest. It does leave some questions, like, for example, how long? How long should this continue? It's all very nice in theory, like when you're talking about it in book learning, but our experience is that there are many painful experiences for human beings while all of this is happening. Hello, could you not wake up already? So we're going to have to talk about that. And also we're going to have to just talk about, like what exactly does this mean? And how exactly does this work? Because it sounds like a nice generic idea. Almost like a way to placate us, to say, don't worry, life is tough, but it's okay, because up there, the spiritual realms, everything's falling into place. And it's like, right, how does that help me? So there's more to explore and to understand, obviously. So now the Rebbe starts to explain how this all works. One of the gifts that Hashem gave us is that He designed the human being to be a beautiful template that we could use to examine, to understand how the divine realm works. So the divine realm is called Seder Hishtalshelus. The divine realm meaning the accessible divine realm. Whatever Hashem has defined for us that we and the highest spiritual beings can relate to and understand. Hashem is obviously beyond any kind of description and any kind of limitations and any kind of systems and any kind of framework. But when we talk about a framework called Seder Hishtalshelus, that's the divine framework for existence. Hishtalshelus means evolutionary. So it's a hierarchical evolutionary framework, which basically means that there are higher realms that are more developed spiritually or more aware of godliness, and lower realms that are less aware of godliness. And there's a trickle-down effect from one level to the next closest level, and that's what creates some kind of cascading connection between the highest and the lowest. So we call it Seder Hishtalshelus. It's the framework that Hashem has created to express divine energies in order that the existence should exist. That divine framework is reflected in us, in our soul framework. So our soul is not a singular entity. It's not a unicellular entity. but rather it's a networked entity. And our soul also has different components. Some of them are more aware, some of them are less aware. They all network together. There's an evolutionary process where one faculty of the soul produces the next or stimulates the next faculty of the soul. And so it's this very dynamic organism, this whole internal ecosystem that we have called the neshama. The better we understand it, the better we understand the higher realms. This is actually what it means when it says that we're created in the image of God. Hashem obviously doesn't have an image. What it means to say is Hashem created a framework by which we could identify certain things of His divine energy. That's called His image. That's the Seder Hishtalshlus. And we're created to reflect that image, which means we have a similar structure inside of ourselves. So let's have a look at ourselves. That's where we'll always start. As the Pasuk says, Mi besori exile. It says in the book of Eov, from my own flesh I can understand God. That means I first got to look at what is familiar, get a better picture of myself, because I think I know myself, but I don't know myself in the way Chassidic describes myself. So let me understand that. Let me get a good picture. Once I have that picture, then I can go and reflect that outwards and say, okay, so that teaches me X and Y about Hashem. So let's talk about the faculties of the soul. They are not the same at every level and dimension of the soul. So the first thing we need to know about the faculties of our neshama is that there are two primary stages that the soul faculties could live in. The one is a completely homogeneous state, and the other is a diversified state. What does that mean? So, again, let's use an example we can relate to. You meet a person for the first time, and you come home and you say, I met so-and-so today. And your family asks you, what are they like? And you say, I think they're a nice person. Now, that's really generic. Because ultimately, at that point in time, when you first meet a person, you don't really know them, so you don't know them. That's the bottom line. You don't know what they think, how they think, what their views are, what their political leanings are, what their emotions are like. We know nothing about them. They seem like a nice person. Obviously, most people seem like nice people the first time that you meet them. Over time, as you develop a friendship with that individual, so you'll start to be able to identify more specific elements about them. So instead of just giving this generic, oh, they're a nice person, you'd be able to say, I find that this person has a tremendous amount of compassion. I see that this person, they're very well-mannered. The way they treat people is a tremendous amount of respect. So now I'm fine-tuning what nice means. So there are two stages in which a person's soul faculties live. There's the homogeneous or generic state of soul faculties, and then there's the diversified state of, okay, I can identify that it's this faculty. This person gets an 8 out of 10 for that particular ability, and they get a 5 out of 10 for that particular ability. So they're really good at compassion, and they're really not so good at tact, right, as an example. So that's where we start to develop a clearer picture of the individual. Now, if I look at my own neshama, that's looking at somebody from the outside, right? Trying to identify somebody from the outside. Now we're looking at the hierarchy from the top down. So at the top of the hierarchy, it's like a seed. The neshama contains inside the seed and encapsulates all the different faculties that are going to grow into this person. So in the same way as the relationship between two people, it grows, right? It grows from a generic relationship to a fine-tuned relationship where you can identify, this is what I really like about this person, and this is how I know that they're a good person, etc. So in a similar vein, you've got like this core of the Jewish soul, and that core of the soul is undeveloped. You can't really identify what's in it, but it will grow and it will become what we call koiches hagluyim, which means revealed faculties. So those are the two states. And then the second state of a koiches hagluyim gufi yesh kama ufanim. When we talk about the revealed faculties of the soul, there's a whole hierarchy as well. Kamoi sheheim begiloi boifim mesudar be'eish ha'adam er, ukamoi shehu behelem b'matzav shel sheina, v'at shelifa'amim heim b'matzav shel hisalfus achmona litzlan. So let's say that we're dealing with a person. What we can say is there are three key distinctions we can make between a person. There's the person when they're awake. So when a person is awake, I could literally sit and watch them for a period of time, and I could have like a whole chart to complete about the nature of that person. I'd be able to answer those questions. So let's say the part of the chart is this person smart, intelligent? Yes, no, right? Would you consider very intelligent, average intelligence, less than average intelligence? I could answer those questions over the course of time of observing that person while they're awake. And then I could start to get even more specific and say, well, which kind of intelligence do they have? Are they a rational mind? Are they a more lateral mind, a creative mind? So we can start talking about that. And then we can get even into more specific details. We could say, well, within the realm of rational, is it a mathematical mind? Is it a legal mind? Is it a medical mind? In the realm of creativity, does that mean that this is somebody who is an innovator? Does it mean that it's somebody who's an artist? Right? So we can keep adding a lot of detail. As long as the person is alive, we'll get the most detail of their soul. As long as the person is awake, we'll get the most detail of the faculties of their soul. So the more time I can interact with somebody while they're awake, the more I can learn about the details of that person's makeup, the details of how they feel about things, what they believe about things, how they interact with people, what their fears are, what their dreams are. Right? I can build this whole very beautiful three-dimensional perspective on who the person is. On the other hand, when that person is sleeping, so then it's almost impossible for me as the outside observer to know anything about them other than their appearance. Right? I can't really rate the way that they think or feel or their perspectives, etc., etc. However, I might be able to still observe certain things. For example, they might have a very restless sleep. They might cry out in the middle of their sleep. So that would indicate that maybe there's some stress or anxiety that's playing in their lives, or maybe they had a trauma. So there's certain things that I might still, very, very limited things that I might be able to identify about them while I observe them while they're sleeping. Because when they're sleeping, what I understand is that instead of the soul faculties operating in full network mode, at this point, they're all just plugged into one mainframe source of energy where they're kind of all playing one role. What's the one role? Recharge. See the distinction? When a person is awake, each particular soul faculty is playing its role, which is distinct and unique. And when the person's sleeping, all of those soul faculties are playing the same role, which is to go back to the source and plug in so that you can energize for the next day. And then there's a dramatic state that a person could be in, which is that the person faints. Now, when a person faints, that's not just simply that the soul faculties are now going to re-plug in and recharge. There's some kind of a breakdown in the system. There's some kind of an emergency that's happening over here at this point in time. And we might well need outside intervention to get this person back to a state where they are recharged and where they can function again. There's almost like a breakdown between the soul faculties and the body. It's almost like we need to somehow find a way to get those soul faculties back to work, running the body again. So those are the three states that we can identify within the revealed part of a person's soul faculties, bearing in mind that if I had to go to the essence of a person's soul, then I'd be in a totally different framework where the revealed nature of each specific soul power or soul faculty would actually be irrelevant, because I just see the pulsating energy source of the soul, and it would be so beautiful and overwhelming that I wouldn't have to look any further. All of this is metaphoric to help us understand the different stages of how Hashem's energy could be manifest or not manifest in our world. And that's, please God, what we'll start next week, is to do the crossover from understanding the concept as it is in souls to how it plays out in Hashem's interface with our world. So we'll stop at this point and then, please God, continue that next week.